Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. My name is Refilwe Jwala. Today, our webinar will be on gendered impact of COVID on women in informal work. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies at the University of the Western Cape. We are having this webinar today in this month of August, which is Women's Month in South Africa, to address the direct and indirect impacts of the pandemic and government's lockdown regulations on women working in the informal economy. Our hashtags for this session today are informal economy and Women's Month. In 2019, with the support of the university, PLAS hosted a Women's Month public engagement on women and work in the informal economy, which brought together a range of informal sector partners, activists, and civil society representing different subsectors in the informal economy, including small-scale fishers, smallholder farmers, health workers, domestic workers, waste pickers, sex workers, foreign migrant workers, informal traders, as well as informal food service workers. And some of the key messages that came out of this public engagement that we held on campus before, obviously, the world changed with this pandemic, were that even within the informal economy, women deal with the pay gap, where men generally earn higher than women. But more than that, there are barriers that women face within the informal sector, such as safety, for instance, for waste pickers, and other issues such as social reproduction responsibilities that women have to deal with, such as childcare, that prevents them from earning higher salaries and working full-time, even in the informal sector. Today, we've got 3 panelists joining us here who will be sharing their experiences and perceptions of the pandemic and the impact of government regulations, government lockdown regulations on their activities and their day-to-day work in the informal economy. So to guide our conversation today, I'll be posing a set of questions to our 3 panelists, and they will be responding, after which we will then open up for a Q&A session. Women constitute the majority of people deriving livelihoods from the informal economy. Their work in the informal economy often overlaps with and is central to social reproduction. However, in spite of the importance of informal work for the welfare of the poor, it is often unrecognized and invisible to regulatory authorities. Since most informal work falls outside the ambit of essential services, restrictive measures have severely affected the ability of women to work under COVID-19 restrictions. The loss of income, alongside food shortages and rising food prices, have greatly contributed to food hunger and insecurity for many poor households. Thus, COVID-19 has greatly affected women who continue to bear the burden of social reproduction. This webinar will present the voices from below and highlight experiences, as I mentioned, of women engaged, particularly in small-scale farming and fisheries. I will hand over to our panelists, and I will also give them an opportunity. Please do introduce yourselves before responding to our first question. But just quickly, we have here with us Temakholo Mathebula, who will be speaking on the experiences of smallholder farmers. We also have Malebo Moepi, who's a PhD candidate at PLAS, who's actually doing research on a cross-border fish trade between Malawi and South Africa. And we also have a small-scale fish trader who wishes to remain anonymous for this session, but is generous enough and has set time aside to share her experiences and perceptions of the changes underway within the context of, this new environment that we find ourselves in. So just to kick us off, the first question I'll be posing to our panelists is, what have been the impacts of COVID-19 on women in the informal economy? Temakholo, please go ahead. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Refilwe, for the opportunity. My name is Temakholo Mathebula. I work for Mahlatini Development Foundation. I am based in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Natal Midlands, and I work mainly in the Swaimane and Escorts areas. But for the purpose of our discussion, I'll be focusing more on the Swaimane areas that we work in. The impacts of COVID-19 on rural women and the informal economy have quite, they've been sort of varied in the communities, in the sense that, just to give a bit of background, the farmers that I work with are mainly involved in crop farming, field crop farming. So they plant maize, beans, potatoes, amadumbe, and sweet potatoes as well. Those are the main crops, and then like vegetables on a smaller scale. So the maize is mainly produced for green mealies, which are sold to baki traders and ama vendors. So when the lockdown started in March, the farmers whose produce was ready were really hard hit by lockdown level 5, because it meant, the shutting down of businesses meant that the vendors could not come into the communities to buy maize, which is a major source of income for the farmers in the area. And so it really it hit them hard, especially in Ozwatini area, where they found that the maize was now drying out in the field. Same happened with cabbages. Cabbages are normally they grow them and they supply to schools as part of the food of the school feeding schemes. And again, the cabbages, some of them just they dried out in the field because schools were closed. So that was brought to a halt. So in terms of income, there are farmers that were really hard hit by level 5 lockdown, to the point where they weren't really sure what was going to happen, as the year went on. And then you get another group of farmers that luckily their maize, it was ready just after level 5 lockdown was relaxed, and we went, I think, into level 4 or something. But people were allowed, like some businesses were allowed to operate, and agriculture, was listed as one of those. So after the relaxation, then the traders and people, that normally buy for the farmers were able to go into the communities again. And so that group of farmers, they weren't as hard hit, and their incomes weren't affected as much, by the lockdown, because their maize was ready just after the lockdown had been relaxed. And then in terms of other crops such as sweet potatoes and amadumbe, luckily those ones they stay a little bit longer. So a lot of farmers have been able to market and sell those. It's just that initially, when it comes to their household food security, they say that they did not have major fears. This was around April, end of March, April, in terms of their food security. And then but they did raise concerns that as time goes by, if the lockdown is not relaxed, or if it doesn't end, or if the situation gets worse, then they're going to have serious problems, because it means that their markets, their informal markets, is going to collapse. Another impact of COVID-19 initially was that farmers had a big problem with moving around, especially those that plant during winter, because they couldn't buy agricultural inputs, since they needed permits and things like that. So the movement was really restricted. So there was another impact that sort of created a little bit of fear amongst them. And then you get those that normally just go to town to buy stuff or run errands. There was a time where taxis were only available between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And during the day, there was no alternative form of transport. And out of fear, people were scared to go hiking, and they stayed indoors a lot. So a lot of things, came to a slowdown or to a halt. But in all honesty, when it comes to their existing agricultural activities, a lot of them were still able to, to do that since they do it closer to their homesteads. It was just the things that they needed to buy from town that some could not get access to. And then also in terms of, people, because in our communities, we've got people that have chronic conditions. We do know that HIV and AIDS is a reality, diabetes is a reality, PB is a reality that people are faced with. And you found that, there were many fears amongst that group of people, asthmatics, that were on chronic medication in terms of, having to move around since, it was said that they were high risk, people. And then, but the government was very helpful in that, as some of our farmers that we work with say that they were given their chronic medication, that they'd be given like a 2-month supply or a 3-month supply so that they wouldn't have to go back, to the clinic, time and again. So that was very helpful initially in terms of, helping to protect them. And yeah, so those were just the major impacts that we saw in the areas that we work in. Thank you.
Much, Temakholo. And when we pick up with our next question, we'd really like to find out more about the specific effects on women who are involved in smallholder farming. At this moment, I'm going to hand over to our second speaker. As I mentioned, she wishes to remain anonymous, and we'll be referring to her as our small-scale fish trader for today. She works in Johannesburg. Thank you.
I am a fish trader who sells fish from Malawi. The impact of COVID-19 since the lockdown is that we are unable to go to Malawi and fetch some more fish. This time we are facing a problem of transportation because we can't go back to Malawi to fetch fresh fish since it's a perishable good. Now, the only challenge we are having is that since they allow us to transport by trucks, the only challenge is that the trucks are very expensive, and sometimes we lose our stuff. Sometimes our fish comes here already perished. So it's very difficult for us to have these things. But sometimes we are still trying to get fish from here in South Africa so that we earn a living. Though it's like a bit expensive, and more of our customers are not used to the South African fish. Sometimes it's a problem of transportation because some of our customers they come from maybe Durban, Cape Town. So this time of lockdown, they can't come this side because the transportation is a problem to them. So the other problem which we are having is that when we get the fish from Malawi, when we are selling on the street, the metro, they took our stuff, which is also a hindrance to our business. Because the fish, when we get from Malawi, the transportation is very high, that the profit we are getting this time is very low. Sometimes when we are ordering the fish to this side, the fish doesn't come this side in full quantity. So all these are the hindrances to the business, because when we are traveling to Malawi, we take good care of our fish ourselves. As to any a profit, it's a very big problem to us. So if there may be a measure that can assist us in traveling up and down, it can help us to earn more profit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and highlighting some of the challenges that you face in terms of your fish trading. Malebo, could you
Thank
please
you,
go ahead?
Refilwe. Thank you, Refilwe, and good day to everyone. My name is Malebo Moepi. I'm doing my PhD at the University of the Western Cape. So I'll be supplementing what the anonymous fish trader has already spoke on. But I think my starting point here is that it is important to note that women that have been engaging in fish trade in the informal economy in South Africa have always had these challenges and problems way even before the COVID-19. And since my research is also touching base on the cross-border fish traders by women, it's important also to note that I'll be adding some inputs in that regard, but more so borrowing from what is happening in the streets in South Africa. So as I've mentioned that the issues has always been there even before COVID-19, the issue became more severe after COVID-19, mainly because we have low food safety standards. The fish that our traders are trading on in the streets, they are of compromised quality. So it's important also to note that aspect in terms of accessing, uh, let's say, formal markets or even other markets. And there's an issue of low personal hygienes because you will recognize that these are our street vendors. They operate along our streets. Hence, they do not have access to potable water. They don't have access to hand sanitizers and masks that the government now requires that we should wear. And as I've talked about the issues of fish having a compromised quality, they do not have an effective processing measurements that could also extend the shelf life of their products. So as a result, Anonymous has mentioned fish is perishable. So as a result, they amount to waste. So they lose more fish. As a result, they lose more income. And COVID-19, we recognize that it also affects both the consumers and the sellers. The consumers, in a way that they're afraid to get infected, mainly because the government also imposed lockdown measures. So we were confined to our homes. And many of them, you'll recognize that they've lost income. Some they've lost jobs and they've also reduced their expenditures. The sellers are also affected in many ways, such as low purchase rate. Anonymous has mentioned that now they have to stock fewer consignments from Malawi because they do not have income. And also the sellers, they have a risk of infecting the COVID-19 because they trade on the streets. And also there's loss of the product due to no proper storage and processing. Normally you find that they store their fish in their places in which they rent. So both supply and demand is very low, to be honest. So with the closures of public spaces, restrictions on social interaction, and as well as the collapse of global supply chains and local distribution networks, many of our informal traders are locked out of their livelihoods. So without income replacement measures, they face the impossible choice between their families going hungry or breaking the rules to put food on the table. So they're risking contagion or sanctions. Anonymous fish trader also spoke about issues of exploitation in form of harassment or corruption by the Metro Police. Uh, there's also an issue of failure to recover or repay the money for the fish that they have taken on credit. Remember, sometimes they buy their fish from the wholesalers, and it could be a trust relationship. They could take the fish on credit, but now with COVID-19, they do not have the income. As a result, they do not have that money to repay back to the wholesaler. Yes, I would like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malebo, for your additional points around the impacts of the pandemic and the government regulations on fish traders. We'll be moving on now to our second question. And here we'd like to focus on how are women responding to the changes underway. So in what ways have women in the informal economy been adapting to the COVID-19 crisis? What are some of the strategies that they're adopting? We will once again start off with Temakholo, and then we'll move on to anonymous fish trader, then move on to Malebo. Thank you, Temakholo. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity again, Refilwe. Just to add on a little bit on the people that we work with, about 95% of them are women. So most of the challenges and impacts that are faced by the people we refer to as farmers, it's actually referring to the women that we're working with in the communities. In terms of their strategies to cope with COVID-19, a lot of them, okay, some have decided to go into a bit of gardening, which is something that they had not focused on much before, because they now see the need to produce their own food locally, especially like healthy food, and they're saying because of the rise in food prices at the shops and the risk of always traveling to buy food, they prefer to now grow their own at home. So a lot of them have gone into winter planting of vegetable crops. And then another interesting effect of the COVID-19 and the coping strategy that they've developed was that some of them are holding back some of the food that they would normally sell. For instance, they were saying that when people come and they would like to buy, say, potatoes, for instance, because they're a bit scarce and they're pricey at the shop, some have said no, we're holding them back for our families, because what has happened in the communities was that, like, with some of the children coming back home, because of loss of jobs and lockdown regulations and things like that, it has put pressure on the household food system, and the women have been instrumental in ensuring that their families have a constant supply, a constant uninterrupted supply of food. So that is one of the things that they have been doing, and COVID-19 has really strengthened their resolve to carry on and even diversify their agricultural activities. And also a part of that, other coping strategies that they've come up with, some are speaking about saving money. They were sharing how they've started to form like stokvels where they can save money in order to avoid finding themselves in a situation whereby they don't have any income whatsoever as a result of COVID-19. And then the ones that do attend these stokvel meetings, they make sure that they follow all the regulations. They sanitize, the social distancing, and other things. And again, those women, those groups are championed and are made up primarily of women farmers, who are determined to carry on being able to supply food for their families. And also other coping strategies, I think it's the main issue of confinement. So they make sure that if somebody has a chronic condition, or if they're more vulnerable, the women are the ones that make sure that those family members are kept at home. They are not exposed to too much risk, and the younger women are the ones that are instrumental in buying things like groceries or whatever the household needs at this moment. moment, especially now that they have seen a surge in cases of COVID-19 here in KZN, and people have actually started passing away, due to COVID-19 related complications. It is becoming ever so important for people to be more careful in terms of their movements and their activities as well. So I would say in short that the main coping strategy that they're coming up with is diversifying their agricultural activities even more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tema. Shall we move on to Anonymous? The question, I will reiterate, is in what ways have women in the informal economy been adapting? So what have been some of your responses to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the government regulations?
As for me, because it's very difficult to bring the fish from Malawi to here, I just thought it wise and change the business. Right now, I just go to the Johannesburg market, I order some fruits, some vegetables, and sell on the street so that I secure my capital. So that after the lockdown, I can manage to go back to Malawi and go on with the fish business. Because this time, if I still insist to order fish from Malawi, I'll end up in loss and loss and loss, of which when the lockdown ends, I won't be able to bring the fish from Malawi again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Malebo?
Thank you, Refilwe. Beefing up to what the anonymous trader has spoken about, I think she highlighted the issue of reducing the fish orders due to reduction in her customer base. She mentioned some of her customers are from Cape Town, they are from Durban, and it's difficult for them to come to Johannesburg to buy the fish, and it's even difficult for her to courier the fish to them. So she has opted to engage in vegetable selling in the street so that she'll be able to pay her rent. The second ways in which they are adapting in the informal economy is that they are marketing directly with the end consumers. Those that are around Johannesburg, they are able to communicate with them through WhatsApp. They are able to get their orders, and they are able to send their orders. And that is, in short, I would say they are exploring other marketing strategies such as social media. And with the regulations from the government that we need to sanitize, we need to wear face masks. Our traders, I was in their store before we started this meeting. All of them are wearing face masks, and they're also having sanitizers. So after selling the products to the customer, they are able to sanitize their customers. So in a way, I think they are at least coping with the pandemic. And what is also important here is that amongst the traders themselves, they are able to share information through social media, through WhatsApp. They're able to share information on possible alternative markets because remember now, they've closed, the government in level 5 had closed the supermarkets, the restaurants, and it was difficult for them to sell to the normal markets that they used to. So now they're exploring, which market can they tap into. And she mentioned that they are using trucks to transport their fish from Malawi into South Africa. What is interesting here is that they are working together. They are working together. So it has formed unity among the fish traders because when I did my research with them, that was last year, many of them, when I spoke to them, they preferred to trade individually. They will go to Malawi or other countries to get their fish using bus. But now what is interesting here is that they are able to order their fish in bulk. So they are sharing the transactional costs, which I think it's a positive thing in terms of now adapting to COVID-19. And as she has mentioned, that they are based or situated along the streets in Johannesburg. The issue here is that previously they went to the metro municipality to ask for a space to trade. Unfortunately, they told them that their spaces are full, so they have to operate where they are. And where they are just seated, like maybe 10 or 12 of them, but they do not have protective shelter. And fish is perishable. So with sunlight, rays, it just gets spoiled very easily and quickly. So what they are doing now is they are also using umbrellas to cover their fish and to cover their vegetable so that those do not go to waste. So I think and I think another point to make here is that since, if I use the example of fish, since fish is perishable, if they feel that it's going to waste, they end up selling fish at a very low price so that they avoid it to being waste. So you can imagine that it's a great financial loss to them. But overall, I think they've tried to improve their hygiene and sanitation in the areas in which they operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Malebo, for those insights in terms of the types of safety measures that women working in fish trade have adopted to respond to the crisis. At this moment, we'll be moving on to our third question, and this one has got to do with policy measures. From your conversations, for instance, Temakholo, with some of the smallholders that you work with, and the data that you have gathered, and this question also applies to our anonymous fish trader based on her own experiences, what policy measures can be adopted to support women in the informal economy and cushion them from the adverse impacts of COVID-19? Thanks, Temakholo.
Okay. Thank you so much for the question, Refilwe. In terms of supporting women in the informal economy, I feel there is a need. I think, and COVID-19 highlighted that very strongly, that there is a need to strengthen the rural economy, and there is a need, for women to be supported more in terms of, implementing the agricultural activities and deriving an income, from that, in the sense that with COVID-19, some of the people, they found themselves, with their maize dried out in the field, and once it's dried out, they can't, do much with it except give it to livestock, or or make him tombo and things like that. So in terms of supporting them, I think there is a need to come up with ways to strengthen the local rural economy so that it is self sufficient, so that people are able to support each other more locally, because what we have seen is that a lot of them struggle because they are so dependent on people from outside to come and buy. So in order for them to gain more support, I think their enterprises need to be formalized, and they need to be more I would say regulated, because people, they always question, the issue of quality, the issue of consistency, the issue of, sometimes we'd like to support, but we can't always, do that, because like, people are not always consistent in terms of supplying sufficient food. So there is a need in terms of providing support to women to strengthen their their enterprises and their farming activities, and also maybe go even into processing if possible, and give them greater access to information. And it would be nice if we had maybe programs that also encouraged younger women to be involved in agriculture, as currently we work mostly with older women, and you find that, you know, over time some struggle with the workload, and they can't always cope with the demands, you know, of their agricultural activities. So if we could come up with programs that could encourage younger women to be more involved, you know, in agriculture, and come up with programs that could allow them to be involved in such a way that they can derive an income from it, I think that could definitely make a difference, and that could help, you know, strengthen the local economy, you know, a little bit more, if we get like more young people coming in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Temakholo. Moving on to anonymous fish trader, what type of support would you like from government in response to the impact of COVID-19 in your sector specifically?
As for me, I wish the government at least to help us for the metro to stop the operations, so that at least we can sell by the street without any fear. Because if these metro guys, they come, they take all our stuff, they are leading us to a downfall of the business. So if they can allow us to sell without doing the operation, without taking our business, they can help us at least to get something, so that we pay our rentals as well as getting our food. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Malebo, would you like to add to that?
Yes, please. Uh, I think what might help our informal traders to function effectively in this pandemic, my own opinion probably would be to organize the sellers in one market site, in which now the metro will be able to improve or expand their sanitation and potable water, because these are essential control for the COVID-19. And I think what is also important for policymakers is to improve the food safety issues, the processing, and also uh, empower our women to package also the fish in order to extend the shelf life. And I think this can be achieved by engaging the women themselves. They could create some awareness of these applicable fish standards and food safety measures in South Africa. And also, they could also empower them in terms of existing fish standards that are harmonized at the regional level. Because remember, they are coming from Malawi into South Africa. So when we have the harmonized fish standards that are adopted in all the countries, I think it will be easier it will be easier to improve the trade. And I think what uh, can be done is to develop an online platform for sale and home delivery of the products in which they trade. And I think in terms of social protection, if there's a way of developing a compulsory insurance for casual fish sellers, I think that can also help in relieving the impact. And it's also important to compensate the women in the fish trading whose businesses were closed. And this could be with cash or even in-kind transfer, like your COVID relief grant. So let's say the embassies could also support uh, the traders from their respective countries. And I think it's also important to prioritize capacity building and skills development along the value chain, but more importantly on the post-harvest measures to reduce waste. And I think the government can also help them by increasing access of these women to credit and microfinance programs with reduced interest rates, flexible loan repayment. And I think we can also promote organization of the women in fish trading so that they can share information on virus prevention. And also they can also advocate or demand for interest-free loans, as well as public investment in childcare, in healthcare, and social protection. And this will allow the women to regain their businesses after COVID-19. And I think what is important here is, as we are dealing with cross-border fish traders, is that they need to be informed of the existing implementation of free trade areas under the SADC, which is our regional economic bloc, which urges the countries to eliminate customs barriers between them, as well as quantitative restrictions to importation. And once the women are empowered and they know the content of those instruments, they'll be able to enjoy the freedom of transit within the community and be subjected to payment of normal rates and services rendered. But because they are not empowered, that's why you see corruption and harassment being persistent. So I would like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Malebo, and thank you again to all our panelists. Some very interesting points that you've raised, and great insights into some of your experiences and the experiences of smallholder farmers, as well as the strategies that have been adopted in response to the pandemic, as well as government regulations. And what's coming out is that restrictions on movement have had a huge impact in terms of the operations of women in the informal economy. And in the case of informal traders, we're seeing the resurgence also of old challenges such as the harassment and eviction of informal traders, something that has received a lot of attention now in the pandemic. As you will recall, at the onset of the pandemic, of the lockdown, in March, in late March on the 26th, we saw that informal traders were actually not permitted to continue their operations. And when those regulations, when they revised, they were required to obtain permits. And the lack of public transport made it very difficult for them to operate, as well as smallholder farmers. So I see that we've got a lot of questions and comments in our comment section, and we're going to be opening up for a Q&A. Time is not on our side, so I'm going to have to be strict with that. And our first question here by Sharon is there a contingency fund for such a crisis? And if so, has any business lady benefited from it? What I'm understanding from this question is Sharon would like to find out if perhaps the smallholder farmers that you work with, Temakholo, and also for the fish traders, if there's a contingency fund, if the women involved in these subsectors are at all organized, and also if you've been able to access some of the provisions that government has put in place, such as the COVID-19 disaster agricultural support relief fund. Temakholo, have some of the smallholder farmers that you're working with been able to access this fund? I don't know in the case of the fisheries sector, if the Department for Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fisheries also has a similar fund in place. And following your response, Temakholo will then move on to our our fish trader and Malebo to respond on that question. Temakholo?
Thank you again, Refilwe. In terms of government funding, yes, there has been some a COVID relief fund that was given to smallholder farmers to purchase mainly inputs. They received vouchers, some for like 15,000 or 20,000 to buy inputs. However, this was not the case with everybody. For instance, some areas that in the Swaimani area that I work in are sort of like on the border of two municipalities. So the one half received the fund and the others, because they belong to another municipality or another district, they did not. But that's just simply I think an administration issue. But there is a COVID relief fund that was given to smallholder farmers. And also in terms of the NGO sector, one of the main interventions that have been there was that there's an organization called the Association for Rural Advancement. They had a program of buying produce from smallholder farmers and distributing it to households that have been severely affected by COVID-19, especially farm dwellers and other people in the outskirts of Pietermaritzburg. So in that way, the smallholder farmers received quite a bit of support, in terms of selling some of the produce that had not been bought under lockdown level 5 regulations. But there has been talks, going forward of maybe the possibility of setting up a flea market where people can sell, formalize themselves, of course, and sell their produce, and then maybe get assistance in terms of logistics with regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Temakholo. Right now, then move on to Anonymous. Could you please respond to the question? Have you been able to access any relief fund or contingency fund in response to the pandemic and the lockdown regulations?
No, not at all. I don't know how to get these things, so it's fine. We're just trying selling the farm produce so as to earn a living. But if there will be any way of getting the funds, then we can have them. Thank you.
Much. Malebo, is there such a fund under the Department of Environmental Affairs that's available for small-scale fishers and fish traders? Are you aware?
I think under the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, they have funds dedicated to small-scale fishers and aquaculture operators. But in terms of the regulations, they have to be registered with CIPC, they have to be South African, they have to provide the financials, they have to prove that they're doing the businesses. But that is, I will say, that is more suitable for South African farmers and fishers. But for cross-border traders, I do not know of any. My view will be if they are registered with their embassies in South Africa, probably that might be the place in which they can get some help. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your responses. We're now moving on to another question coming from Alicia, and she asks, how have COVID-related demands on women's labor shifted gender labor divisions in general? For example, are men contributing more or asked to contribute more to household work to assist women's labor burdens now under lockdown regulations and all the other factors that come into play now within the context of the pandemic. Temakholo, can we just maintain that you start us off to
Okay, all right.
yeah, and yeah.
Okay, no problem, Refilwe, thank you. I would say that the labor demands on women have not shifted that much. In fact, I would say that they're actually now under more pressure, you know, to work, to produce more food, to provide for their families. I think the rural economy, I mean, rural communities are structured in terms of, or fairly structured in terms of the roles of men and women. So in households or in areas where the men have not been that involved in agricultural activities in the household, even under the lockdown, they kept their involvement to a minimum, you know, or like, yeah, like as far as I know, no, there hasn't been much involvement in terms of that. And I think it was also worsened by, you know, when alcohol was relaxed and they opened liquor stores and things like that, the men, you know, we found that, you know, there was an increase in people going out drinking and stuff. So then you find that the women are left to actually be the ones that champion the work as far as agriculture is concerned. But I will mention, although this discussion is about women, I will mention that the few men, the very few men that we do interact to or work with, they also have increased their commitment during the COVID, as they were also impacted by its effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Temakholo. Anonymous?
As for me, my husband is helping me to take my business to the market. Sometimes he helps me in washing, and sometimes he's helping me in cooking, of which I don't take it for granted. Thank you.
Thanks, Anonymous. Would you say that this has changed more? Are you getting more help now under COVID?
Yeah, I can say yes. I can say so because he's not working. He doesn't go for drinking. He's full time at home. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Malebo, could you please add?
I think what is also important here is though men are not actually selling fish on the streets, they are providing support to the women in form of helping them to take the stock into the streets in the morning and pick it up in the evening. But they are also providing the kind of security measures, because as these women are continuously harassed by the metro police, they are just scattered in the streets, but they are the eyes and ears of the women. So you see that they inform the traders on time that the metro is coming, so they quickly pack their things and come back to the house. But I think apart from that, she mentioned that they're actually helping in the household. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your responses. We're moving on to the next question, which Muniba from Plus posed earlier, and she's asking, how are the women fish traders organized? This question will obviously be for Anonymous and Malebo. Anonymous, are you part of a union or a fish traders organization?
No, As for me, I'm not in any organization. I just do it on my own. Thank you.
Thanks, Anonymous. Malebo?
Thank you, Refilwe. The traders from Malawi, they prefer to trade individually as opposed to being in a group. But as we spoke about earlier on that, I think now with the pandemic, at least I think it brought them together. They are able to order their fish from Malawi as a group. The reason that they work individually is mainly issues of trust, issues of black magic, those myths. But I think with time and with this pandemic, things can change and they can start to work together. But what we are also seeing here is that the women, hello, Refilo, can you hear me? I think I'm back now. So I think what is coming out here is that the women are clustered in groups wherever they are, and you find that the groups in which they are, you find that they are probably from the same region in the country or the same tribe, or they even speak the same language apart from their national language, which is Chichewa. Thank you. It stopped. No. Okay. Let me see.
Apologies for that. It seems that my mic was muted. I had posed a question to Temakholo. Do you think that smallholder farmers will be able to return to normal when the pandemic recedes? Do you feel, in your experience, can you say in your experience if you see this setback as long-term or not? Temakholo, please unmute yourself. We seem to be experiencing technical issues. I'm unable to.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
Can
clearly.
you hear
Please.
me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much, Refilwe. Well, I don't believe that things will ever go back to normal, in the true sense of the word. I think, COVID-19 caught most of our women, unaware. It caught us off guard, and it has affected the way people, make decisions and the way that they see themselves. And I think with the surge in cases and the high number of funerals that we're starting to have, I think it's gonna have, the emotional and psychological effects are definitely gonna be long lasting, and for now it seems to be strengthening people's resolve to go like deeper or into and expand, their agricultural activities with the little that they have, because we're talking about people that have limited resources here. So post COVID-19, we all just waiting to see what is going to happen. And at best, we hope that at least people will carry on, with farming. And because it has been, one good thing I must say about COVID-19 is the fact that it has highlighted how important agriculture is in addressing food security related issues. So post COVID-19, definitely if people can expand, in terms of that, or get even more people involved, that would be great. But yes, it will have long lasting effects, and I don't think things will ever go back to the way they used to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Temakholo. We have really run out of time, but before we close, I wanted to give Anonymous and Malebo an opportunity to answer to the last question that I posed. What do you think? I just wanted to find out from you, as I've asked Temakholo, in terms of small-scale fish trade. What are the long-term implications of these developments, and do you think you'll be able to return to normal when the pandemic recedes?
No, it will take time for us to turn to normal since we incurred so many losses this pandemic time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anonymous. Malebo, any final comments on that? Responses to that question?
I agree with my fellow panelist members that it's going to take time for our women to recover economically. But I think what will be important will be to, start being innovative and seeking alternative ways of generating income. So, but overall, I think it will take time, and I must applaud our women that they have really tried to cope with the situation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Malebo. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our panelists for your contributions and your inputs in this session. We have learned, we're taking away great insights, and judging from our comments section, our viewers and participants have also enjoyed this webinar and have taken a lot in terms of the insights you have shared. Thank you all for joining this webinar, and hope to see you again in the comments section in our next Plus webinar next Thursday between 1 and 2. Do take care, everybody. Thank you.